So Bernard Hopkins defeats Karo Murat with a 12-round unanimous decision. This fight was a little more action-packed than the typical Bernard Hopkins fights, which are usually very boring. Hopkins tends to throw very few punches, tends to be very, very tactical. Whereas in this fight, he let his hands go more than we're used to seeing. He exchanged more than we're used to seeing. And to me, it seemed like he was having fun in there. We even saw some showboating and whatnot. He seemed like he was having fun. But because he was more aggressive in this fight than we're used to seeing him, Murat did have a few successes. He did clip Hopkins here and there with right hands and some decent shots. And Murat, to me at least, I didn't watch the HBO or Showtime feed, whatever it was. I watched some European foreign language feed, so my perception of what was going on wasn't colored by the commentary. So to me, I thought that Murat, especially in the first half of the fight, did have a fair amount of success, and I would actually say that he had more success than most of Hopkins' recent opponents. Yeah, I thought he did better than Tavoris Cloud against Hopkins, and I thought he did better than Jean Pascal in the rematch against Hopkins. So he did have a few bits of success here and there, but again, I think a lot of it may have been down to the fact that Hopkins decided that he was going to start exchanging with this guy and, giving the fans a little bit of the excitement which they criticize him for not providing. So, it was an okay fight. Hopkins hurt the guy a few times. He was clowning on him, quite a lot. Murat had his best moments early in the fight, and then Hopkins really took over in the second half of the fight and, ran away with it in the end for a clear, unanimous points decision victory. And after the fight, he still expressed his interest. Apparently, I haven't seen the interview myself, but apparently he's still expressing his interest in a Floyd Mayweather fight. Now, like The Wire, I also believe that Hopkins would beat Mayweather, even if it's at 160, even if Hopkins is drained. I just think his arms are too long. He's too tall. I think Floyd would struggle to land any punches on Hopkins' head. As I've said many times, Floyd is not used to fighting a guy who has longer arms than himself. Very seldom in his career has he had to come up against someone who even has as longer arms as himself, never mind longer. I think there's only one guy who's actually had longer arms. I'm not talking about reach, I'm talking about arm length. There's only one guy who's had a longer reach, or two guys I think that have had a longer reach than Floyd. One was Oscar De La Hoya, and there was another guy very early on in Floyd's career who, he was a nobody anyway. But in terms of arm length, very few guys can compete with Floyd in terms of arm length, but Bernard Hopkins would have longer arms than Floyd. How's Floyd? So it's not going to be a case of how does Hopkins land on Floyd? It's going to be also a case of how does Floyd land on Hopkins? He's fighting a guy way taller with way longer arms than he's ever fought, before in his career. So, and obviously Hopkins is supremely gifted defensively himself and strategically. Yeah. So should that fight go, I doubt the fight will go down. All right. But if Floyd really wants to make history and really make a serious case for him being the greatest fighter of all time, never mind what all his fanboys say, because, Floyd obviously, like a lot of these top fighters, he has a lot of fans who are saying he's the greatest fighter of all time, and really and truly, his fanboys, his fanatics, they're going to say that. It's not really credible at this stage, but they're going to say that. But in terms of serious boxing fans, if Floyd wants to make a case to the serious boxing fans that he is, or he should be considered as possibly the greatest fighter of all time, he has to be taking on fights like the Hopkins fight, or someone at middleweight. Take on a Peter Quillin or a Martinez or someone at middleweight. That would really stake his claim, because he's the one that comes out and claims he's the greatest fighter of all time. If he was to do something like that, like beat a Hopkins, fight and beat a Hopkins, that way, listen, I would be considering him one of the greatest fighters, possibly top 5 greatest fighters of all time, if he was able to beat Hopkins. I know Hopkins is past his prime. I know Hopkins is nearly 50 years old. I know he'd be draining himself to come down to 160. But nonetheless, he's still one of the top light heavyweights in the world. Yeah? If Floyd beat any of the middleweight champions out there, it will be historic. At least in my opinion, it will be historic if you beat any of the middleweight champions out there. So to beat a living legend like Hopkins, that would be phenomenal if Floyd did that. You know, I'd like to see him do it. I'd like to see Floyd fight Hopkins, to be honest with you. I'd like to see Floyd fight any of the middleweights so he can really push his talent and see how good he really is. Yeah? There's a couple fighters down at 154. If we, go below 160, there's Vanes Martirosyan. There's also Erislandy Lara. And he's facing off against Austin Trout. By the way, I think Lara's going to beat Trout. And for a long time, I've always believed that Lara and Carlos Molina may be the best junior middleweights out there. You know, if we put Floyd aside, them two may be the best junior middleweights out there. May even be better than Floyd. We don't know. At junior middleweight, they'd have to get in the ring and fight and prove who's the best. But those two fights also, especially the Lara fight, I think will be an intriguing fight for Floyd Mayweather. Very intriguing fight as far as I'm concerned. But again, Lara's got to get past Austin Trout. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, Floyd against Hopkins, I wouldn't mind seeing it, to be honest. As outlandish as it sounds, other fighters have done outlandish things. Roy Jones went up to heavyweight. That was outlandish. Right? Sugar Ray Leonard came off a 3.5-year layoff and eye surgery to take on possibly the greatest middleweight of all time in, oh God, why does his name escape me? Marvin Hagler. That was like boxing blasphemy for a second, forgetting Marvin Hagler's name. So yeah, fighters have done outlandish things before. I'd like to see Floyd do something outlandish, to really put himself up there with the very, very top guys of all time. So hit me up in the comments. Let me know. I know I've been talking about Floyd for most of this video, or half of this video at least, but it's more interesting talking about Floyd's next fight than this fight here with Hopkins Murat, because really and truly, it was pretty much an exhibition by Hopkins, a sparring session. Murat, he tried his best. He was a strong young guy, but not in Hopkins' league. Never will be in Hopkins' league. So it is what it is. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you feel about this. Let me know how you feel about the whole Hopkins-Floyd thing. A lot of people hating on Hopkins. They think that he's an opportunist, that he shouldn't be calling out Floyd, that he should leave Floyd alone. I mean, Hopkins fights bigger guys as well as smaller guys. He's not just a bully. He fights bigger guys too. Younger guys all the time. So I don't necessarily have a problem with him calling out Hopkins. A lot of people thought that, calling out Floyd. A lot of people thought that Hopkins was joking when he said he'd like to fight Floyd. I don't know why they thought he was joking, because why would a 50-year-old man not be interested in a fight of that magnitude with that much money involved? Why would he not be interested? Yeah? And someone posted on Facebook a very good point. A lot of people are angry at Hopkins for calling out Floyd, saying Hopkins should stick to his own weight division and all that. But I wonder how many of those people were not angry at Hopkins when he fought Tito Trinidad, because Tito Trinidad was a welterweight coming up to middleweight. Yeah, which is essentially what Floyd would be doing, a welterweight coming up to middleweight. Tito Trinidad looked fat at middleweight. He didn't look good in terms of his definition and his body. He looked fat. Yeah, but he still stepped up to middleweight, knocked out William Joppy, and then obviously fought Hopkins and lost to Hopkins. So a welterweight coming up to middleweight, it's been done before. Hopkins has taken them on before. He obviously also took on De La Hoya, who was coming up from 154. Hopkins has done this stuff before. It's nothing new. Yeah, it's nothing new. This is just a continuation of what Hopkins has done before with smaller fighters coming up, taking them on at middleweight. So, it is what it is. Interestingly, Hopkins apparently didn't mention Stevenson. Stevenson has hardly been able to keep Hopkins' name out of his mouth. He's constantly talking about Hopkins. So I don't know whether that fight's going to happen, whether Hopkins really wants to go there. There's obviously Kovalev as well, a 175 light heavyweight. That's a fight there. There's many options for Bernard Hopkins right now, but I think at nearly 50 years old, he wants one big, huge payday. That's what he wants. I think when he saw the amount of money that Floyd made in the Alvarez fight and the amount of fanfare surrounding that fight, he thought to himself, you know what? I need a payday like this. I need to be involved in an event like this one last time before I retire. I need it. I want to be the guy facing Floyd. You know, it would be a bizarre thing to see Floyd fighting Hopkins because the size difference is so huge. Not just in terms of, you know, weight, but height and reach is massive. Massive size difference. So anyway, hit me up in the comments, man. I'm procrastinating like hell now. How do you feel about this performance that Hopkins put on against Murat? Hopkins is a living legend as far as I'm concerned. Absolute living legend. Yes, he is dirty. Definitely a dirty fighter. We're not going to question that. But dirty or not, he would have won this fight anyway. We know that. So hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you feel about this. Let me also know how you feel about a possible Hopkins-Floyd fight. Whether or not you think it'll ever happen, whether you think it should happen, how you feel about Hopkins pursuing that fight, and who you think would win if the fight went ahead. Hit me up in the comments. This is Hatman. I'm out.